Hi friends, welcome to day 3. We're going to paint this beautiful little white moth orchid today. And I took pictures in my backyards of this that I've been sharing with you. I'm actually going to add a little bit more Quin Magenta, or if you're using your MeiLang palette, you could use their madder red or their rose red. Either one of those are perfectly fine. We're going to be using some cad yellow, which is in MeiLang, and these are my Winsor Newtons. So this is the Quin Magenta I'll be using. One of my favorite colors, and that cad yellow will be predominantly what we'll be using. And I mix my sap and my olive green for the stem, and then what I'll do is for some of the shadows and darker areas of the stem, I might mix my flower color with my green. It creates this beautiful coherency between the flowers and the leaves. So let's go ahead and get started. I am using, as you know, I am a Artisto lover. I typically use the little ring binders for most of my practice paintings daily. These are so great just to keep them all in order by season or color palettes. Has this great ring binder. And then if you did want to gift this or put it in a frame, it is perforated and it's got a really lovely thick texture. I've actually used quite a bit of water on these and they're fine. So this is just a larger version of that. This is a 9x12 and it is 140 pound cold pressed. And these also come in a pack of 3. So that's what I'm using for that. I've got my wash and my rinse, 2 wells, really important to make sure your brush is clean before you're going into all the different colors. And I love the Meeden products. They're very nicely made. They're all porcelain. And I just love them. Such great quality. Today I'm using my Mist Ceramics palette just because I had some of these colors on here. She makes these custom palettes for me. I'm not affiliated with her. She's just kind of a friend. I'm happy to link her Etsy site for you, although she doesn't do those palettes all the time because they're a little bit time consuming for her. But tell her I sent you and she'll probably work with you. As far as my brushes, I'm going to be using my 8 Princeton Velvet Touch, which you know I love. It's got the shorter handle and it's got this really nice finish and texture. That's the Velvet Touch 8 round. I will probably also keep my 6 round near because it's just a little bit finer. And for the beginners, I always share these Degato brushes. They come in a set. And for the price, although the Princeton aren't bad, they're anywhere from $8 up. But if you're not quite ready to invest in a few of those, this Degato set is absolutely fantastic. I've been using it for about 5 months now. And you get a whole set. They're very springy and the points are phenomenal. I love them. So this is the Degato set. I think you get 5 or 6 and it's maybe $15 and they're wonderful quality. Okay, so that's all our supplies we'll be using. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be using a lot of wet and wet. And for the most part, these moth, they're called the Moth Orchid. They have a lot of white in them. So I'm going to use a little bit more of that Quin Magenta than maybe they might have, but that's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started first because I can't wait to dive in here with our Moth Orchid. And I'm going to work left to right because I'm right-handed and holding my brush here right at the ferrule and a little bit to the side because I want to be able to use the point and the side of my brush, resting my hand, the side of my palm on my paper. And for me, that's just really, my hand isn't steady enough, so I like to be able to rest it here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go in and let's see, let's wet the left-hand side of that petal. Not the inner petal, the outer petal. And then I'll go into my Quin Magenta here. And if you're using the MeiLang palette, which is such a lovely, lovely choice for a beginner because you've got all these wonderful colors that are pre-mixed for you. Their color that would be similar would be the madder red, and it's beautiful. It's bright, and I love it. But for Winsor Newton today, I'm using Quin Magenta. So while this is damp, you only want this to be damp, and it might have even actually dried now. So I'm just going to go in and wet it a little bit more. There we go. So no puddles. This is just shiny. So if I tilt my paper, that dampness isn't moving. And then I'm going to go in again, pick up some of that Quin Magenta. If you're not sure you have too much water, just tap it off on your paper towel. And then I'm going to start going in and tapping in like this. And just let that kind of blend and do its own thing. I'm going to wash and rinse my brush in my beautiful Meeden brush or water. And then wet this other side. And I'm only wetting it about halfway. So that pink paint is only going to go as far as that water line goes. Pick up some of my paint. And again, if you think you have too much, just dab it off. And there it goes. I'm just tapping in here and letting it kind of do its own thing. And this is what, to me, is just so beautiful about watercolors, is the ability to be able to do that. So I'm going to go in down here, same thing, just kind of dampen that. And this time I think what I might try, I wasn't planning this, but I'm going to pick up a little bit of my Winsor Newton Payne's Gray, which is the dark color I use instead of black. Now I actually don't even have room on that palette, so let's just go right here. Has just like a grayish, beautiful gray blue tint to it. And I just want a tiny, very light value, meaning more water to paint. And I'm going to tap in a little bit here to create some shadows. There we go. And while this is drying, I might even draw some out with the tip of my brush, like that. And as you see there, I then kind of tapped into that gray. So what that did is, it almost looks like it's white, but it has this very faint, subtle undertone of the pink in it. Now I'm going to go here and just pull out some of these as well. Just using the flick of my brush, just like that. And it already was kind of doing its thing there. I just kind of helped it along. There we go. So now I'll go into this left-hand side and do the same thing. So wash and rinse my brush and tap it off so it's just damp. And I'm being careful not to touch into that, because otherwise it'll all just blend together. And then I'm going to pick up just the tiniest bit, very light value, a lot of water. A darker value would have more pigment in it. And again, I'm going to tap in. So it just looks like some shadows on there. And what I might do even in here is add in some of that Payne's Gray. Now I've got pink in my brush. Just like that. And maybe go in with a tiny bit of that Quin Magenta or Rose Madder. Pick up just the tiniest bit of that. There we go. And look how beautiful that is spreading. It's spreading really nicely. Now I'm going to let that dry. I could always go in here and tap in a little bit more of my Quin Magenta. Not really necessary, but definitely you could. And just let that blend a little bit more, like this. And now I will leave that because when we come back, we'll work on some of these inner petals and maybe this petal. Actually, we could go into this kind of crown petal and making sure not to touch these two and just dampen that one using the tip of my brush. So very light pressure. So I'm just activating the tip of my brush, and I might pick up a tiny bit of that Payne's Gray again, very light value of it, because we just really want it to look like a shadow. There we go. Okay, let's leave that alone, and we can go into some of these smaller flowers here. So I'll do the same thing. I'll just wet the area, just the same process as we did here. Go in and pick up some of that Quin Magenta and tap in. So a lot of times, especially when it's little like this, for me, I just want to give that illusion of the flower. I don't have to have every single tiny detail of it. And then here I might do the same. And here, I'm not even using the gray in these. So it's just giving this beautiful illusion of that flower. And then we'll go in again and we'll dampen this area. And pick up some of that Quin Magenta, tapping into the center of those petals, and just let the watercolors do its magic and spread those. Okay? Now later when we go in, we're going to create some yellow in the middle of these. That's going to be really beautiful. Right now, let's work on these stems. So I'm going to use, because it's my go-to green, my sap green and my olive green. That's just kind of my go-to. And then for some of the shadows, like I said, I'll mix some of my green and my Quin Magenta. So let's go in with the tip of our brush. So holding our brush straight up and down. So we just are getting the tip. The more diagonal I turn my hand, I'm going to use more of the belly of the brush, which is going to create a thicker stroke. So just the tip of my brush, and actually let me take that back. Let me back up. Wash and rinse your brush. And let's just wet the stem, because I love working wet and wet so much. Let's just wet this stem, this branch, and now pick up some of that green and let's just touch in like that. That gives you so much more of a washier look, I think. Again, we'll just touch in here and wet this stem. Now let me tell you too, the darkness of my drawing is not my usual. I drew these much darker so that you could see them. Normally I would have very light pencil marks, so just so you know. And then I'm just going to touch in and let the paint kind of spread as it might on its own in those stems. Now, while that is wet, I'm going to go ahead and pick up some of that green and mix it with some of the yellow. Now, because green and a red are opposites, it's going to create this beautiful kind of moody color. And I'm just going to go in and maybe tap in along the bottom of that branch. And it's going to create this beautiful shadow. Maybe even some of these little buds. And what's nice is it just really draws together the whole painting, because you're combining the flower petal with the stems. So it really unites and creates this wonderful harmony between your painting. Now I might add more green here and there to some of these little buds. And then these, I will use a very light version of that pink, and just using the side of my brush, I'm kind of swiping. And I'm somewhat hoping some of that pink mixes with the green, because I think that's really pretty. And you can dot in a little bit darker values, because we don't want our entire painting to be the same color. And do these stems. Might even add a little bit of green. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and go in and create some yellow in here. Now for that, I think what I will do is, let's see, we could do this two ways. I think what I want to do is that push and pull technique. So I'm going to grab some of my CAD yellow, which I just filled up, by the way, if you watched that video. And it's a medium value. So it's got maybe, I'd say 70% pigment, 30% water. And I'm going to go in and create some little dab marks in the center there. Now I'm making sure this is dry first. Just like this. Now before that dries, I wash and rinse my brush, and I tap it off so it's just damp. It's not real wet. And I'm going to go in and use that push and pull technique to encourage this to spread. I'm just barely tapping into the edge of that yellow. And drawing it out, just like that. Okay. Now I might go into the edge here with some of this pink, so I'll pick up some of that pink, that Quin Magenta, that beautiful pink. And let's just go into the edge here. Now again, you know, the Moth Orchid, like I've got really wash and rinse my brush, doesn't have this much pink in it, but I like pink in my orchid, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and add more pink in, just so you know that. And look how beautiful. I might want to darken this inside area a bit, so I'll pick up some more of that Quin Magenta, a little darker value. And now this is dry. And we'll go in just to outline, but don't touch that wet paint. Wash and rinse my brush, tap it off, and now I'll do the push and that pull technique again, being careful where I put my hand here. And just encourage that to kind of spread out. And it gives just a little bit of depth in there. Let's do this other side. And I'm using a pretty dark value of that Quin Magenta here. I'd say 80% paint, 20% water. There we go. Wash, rinse, tap off. And now I'll go in with just a damp brush, not wet, and start just tapping into the edge of that. And there you go. So look how beautiful that is. Now I feel like I want to add, I think what I'll do for the yellow in here is I'll just pick up a little bit of that yellow I had already mixed in a lighter value. So I added water to it. And I'm just going to go in and kind of tap in there. So it's just a hint of what this larger one looks like, because those are smaller. And picking up this is where this glazing I love comes in. So a darker value of that Quin Magenta or your Rose Madder. And we can go in and just tap into a few of these. Just using the side of my brush. Create some interest there. And there we go. Okay, I think we're ready to go ahead. Oh, you know what? Actually, we need to draw these stems. So let's wet those areas using the tip of my brush. Just dampen them so they're shiny. And go into our green. And just tap in and let it spread with that water. There we go. Okay, I think I quite like that. I might just tap in a tiny bit more here in the center. Now that was kind of a lot. Didn't mean to do quite that much, but that's okay. So it's got this kind of burst. Okay. And maybe let's go ahead and start working on our leaves here. So I'm going to use just my sap green for these. In a mid value, so it's not the lightest value, but it's not the darkest. So maybe 50-50, 50 paint, 50 water, but it's quite wet. And I'm going to go in and just start laying down a glaze here of that paint. I'm leaving some white spaces. Just like that. Wash and rinse my brush. Maybe add a little water to that. And there we go. Now, while it's wet, I want to go in and add some darker green into those areas that might be shadowy. So I'll pick up my olive green, maybe some of this Quin Magenta, and we've got that beautiful shadowy color. Look at that. And let's just tap in here. And then let that spread. Tap in here. And let that spread. And it gives you this illusion of these leaves tucking in. Now I'm going to also add just the tiniest bit of that yellow while it's kind of wet. So I'm going back to that cad yellow that I used. And I might just do something like that. And there you go. I think that's really pretty, a lot of interest. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone and go on to our second petal here. So picking up that green again, pretty watery, and I'm going to go in and just glaze over this petal here. Now here's where, because I'm working on a bigger sheet of paper, you could use a bigger brush. I'm also leaving some white spots in there. Using this side of my brush just to kind of dampen, and then maybe even pick up some of that yellow. And then the darker green that we used here. Just like that. And really create some interest in here. I think that's really pretty. I'm going to grab a tiny bit more of my sap green. And add that in there. So again, using the side of my brush. Okay, and we'll move on to our next leaf. And so my brush is damp, picking up some of that sap green. It's quite wet. And going in, leaving some white spaces, like that. Okay, I might go into the dark area there with some of that sap green and the pink. Let's just mix a little bit of that here. There we go. Now because it's kind of underneath, I might pull that out a little bit more, like so. And then this part is where the leaf is curling over. So I think in there, once it dries, or we could actually go in now. Let's pick up some of that yellow, maybe a little bit of that green, and create this brighter green. And curl that over. There you go. And then we have one more leaf here. Let's go ahead and pick up that paint, leaving some white spaces. Come on down. Picking up some of that shadow color, which we made. I know I have to work fast here because we're working wet and wet. There we go. And maybe a little bit more of that green. go. Now these little funky root things coming out, I'm just going to draw those in. They actually had some brown in them, and even a little, it looked like a touch of blue. So there we go. I'm going to go in now and let's make this little centerpiece a brighter yellow. So I'm picking up almost 80%, darkest value of that yellow. And I'm going to go in there and just tap that in like that. And let's see what happens if I draw out some more of these. Now, I don't know if I quite like that, but I've already committed to it. So, okay, what I'm going to do is tap into some of that pink. And we're going to do some little dots on these two little side petals. So very, very light touch, holding my brush up and down and just tapping in like that. There we go. And we could maybe even do that on these. Just right in the center. Just to give a little bit of interest. Don't want to get too picky here. Just to, like I said, create some interest. Maybe go in with one more glaze of that Quin Magenta on some of these. Okay, I think we are about done with this. I mean, this is where I would kind of stop. We could always go in and add maybe just a few dots in here if we wanted. I'm being careful not to touch that center part I just painted, so that's kind of fun. And I think I feel pretty good about this. I think that's kind of enough for me. I feel like I want to put some more values in this area. It's all kind of the same value. So I might just go in with my green and a pretty dark value. So maybe 90% paint, 10% water. And just again, using the tip of my brush, holding my brush straight up and down. Creating some different values in there. I might even go into my brown here. Trying not to go into that paint with the tip of my brush. We don't want to do that, because we will ruin our brush, the point, and creating some of these little woody pieces. There we go. I love brown and green together. I think they're so pretty. So using the side of my brush. And you know if you're using the tip of your brush a lot, because you'll have these little center holes in your paint wells. And there we go. I think I'm done. There we go. You could always do some splatters around, really kind of up to you. But there we go. There was day 3 of our orchids for the beginner. I hope you enjoyed these. I might make a kit for you out of this, but I have already offered you the drawings for free just in my community tab. So hopefully you grabbed those, but if you would like to get the kit all together with day 1, day 2, day 3, I might go ahead and make that a kit in Etsy. And thank you so much to all of you that give me super thanks. I cannot thank you enough for those. They're wonderful. They help me so much. I get really excited because I know I can go and buy some new things to share with you, so it's always very exciting and fun for me, and it just shows me that you like what I'm putting out here for you. All right, friends, I'll list all of my supplies below, and happy painting. I hope that was fun for you. Day 3, that's a wrap, and I will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.